In today's video, we reveal the tragic story of Elizabeth Ariano, a young woman whose life was taken in a way no one could have foreseen. Juanita had no way of knowing how drastically her day was about to shift. On that April morning in 2016, she went straight to Elizabeth's bedroom. Her daughter had been out with friends the night before, so she expected to find her half asleep, slightly hungover, and grumbling from beneath the blankets. But when she opened the door, the bed was already perfectly made. Everything looked tidy and untouched. Juanita felt a moment of relief. Perhaps Elizabeth had simply woken up early and started her morning routine. As a single mother of 4, Elizabeth hated running behind schedule. Juanita made her way downstairs, but the eerie silence stopped her cold. And when she reached the kitchen, she found she wasn't alone there either. Where could she have gone? Juanita searched every room in the house. She could have flipped the place upside down looking for Elizabeth, but there was simply no sign of her. After checking every corner and peeking into every room, she was forced to accept the truth. Elizabeth wasn't there, and the spotless state of her bedroom added a chilling possibility. Maybe Elizabeth had never come home at all. It was April 15, 2016. Earlier that day, Elizabeth had plans to meet a few coworkers for happy hour. The group was looking forward to unwinding, sharing drinks, and chatting about life. Elizabeth had been excited for this for a long time. She desperately needed a night out. Despite her deep love for her kids and family, she rarely had time for herself, juggling her job, living apart from her husband, and caring for the children on her own. The plan sounded perfect for her. Lizzie and her friends met up at a local pub after work, enjoying drinks, food, and each other's company. According to her friend, she was in great spirits, relaxed, cheerful, and showing no signs of worry or fear. She was genuinely happy and soaking in the moment. But like all good nights, this one eventually ended. And no one could have imagined that just hours later, the same Elizabeth who had been smiling and full of warmth would be gone. Her family and friends were devastated, blindsided by the loss of someone so gentle and loving. Life shifted permanently after Elizabeth's death. Nothing was ever quite the same again. Liz Ariano had spent her entire life in Fort Worth, Texas. She was adored by her family and had been known for her generous, tender nature since she was a little girl. She was incredibly close to her 3 sisters. Even after her parents separated, Elizabeth maintained a strong bond with both of them. She was often called the family glue because she had a way of keeping everyone connected. She was the kind of person who always checked in, always communicated, and always made sure her loved ones knew where she was and she knew where they were. In many ways, she was an open book. She was the one reaching out, asking why someone hadn't texted back or where they were headed. She kept track of the entire family, not out of nosiness, but out of genuine care. Some people thought she was overly involved, but that couldn't be further from the truth. She simply loved watching over the people she cared about. On top of that, Elizabeth made attending church every week a part of her routine. She was a devoted Christian who believed deeply that honesty, kindness, and selflessness could take anyone far in life. And most of the time, she was right. Those beliefs reflected exactly who she was. Gentle, patient, and endlessly caring. Liz enjoyed being around others, but more than anything, she longed to build a family of her own. She dreamed of meeting the right partner, settling down, and creating a home filled with love. That dream began to take shape when she met someone in high school. She had no idea her hopes were about to become reality. While attending Diamond Hill High School, Elizabeth met Rudy Ariano. The details of their early relationship aren't fully known, but what we do know is that they crossed paths in school and fell in love. They stayed together for roughly 13 years. After graduating high school, Elizabeth and Rudy only grew closer. Eventually, they married and their family expanded from 2 to 6 with the arrival of 3 sons and a daughter. They settled in Fort Worth and built their life there. But like any family, not everything was smooth. Then out of nowhere, Elizabeth told her family she was considering divorcing Rudy. No one knows what triggered such a sudden decision, and the news stunned everyone. Elizabeth was not someone who acted impulsively. She always took her time, weighing her options and thinking carefully before making any major choice. It was as if she felt she had no other choice. But this situation was different. Something inside her had shifted and she felt compelled to leave. She understood how challenging life would be as a single mother of 4. Yet those who knew her believed she must have carefully weighed the decision before acting on it. Once her mind was made up, she and Rudy separated. Elizabeth took the children and moved out of the Ariano home, settling into her parents' house in Fort Worth. Rudy claimed the separation was recent and temporary, but Elizabeth thought otherwise. She was determined to end the marriage and planned to finalize the divorce soon. Just a week after leaving her husband's home, she had already moved in with her parents. She might have felt some sadness about the move, but outwardly she appeared content, doing her best to live her life and stay focused on work each day. Friends and coworkers said she was still her usual self. Upbeat, cheerful, and full of light. At home, she made plans with friends, cracked jokes with her parents and siblings, and cherished every moment with her 4 children, who meant everything to her. She genuinely seemed happier than she had been in a long time. But that joy was about to be shattered in the most devastating way imaginable. This brings us back to April 15, 2016, the tragic night at the bar. That day, Elizabeth met up with her friends for happy hour. They spent a few hours there, sipping drinks, sharing food, and catching up on everything that had happened in their lives over the past few months. Eventually, the evening wounded down, and the group went their separate ways. From what's known, Elizabeth had just enough to feel a little buzzed, but not nearly enough to lose control or start slurring her words. That was exactly who she was. Responsible, cautious, and always thinking ahead. If she ever thought she might drink too much, she made sure to arrange a sober ride. And on a weekday, she certainly wasn't planning on getting drunk to the point of blacking out. She had only a few drinks and shared laughs with her friends. They asked her to call as soon as she got home, partly for their own peace of mind, and Elizabeth agreed. When she reached the curb outside her parents' house, she called a friend to let her know she had arrived safely. She was literally just steps from her front door. All she had to do was hang up, gather her things, and go inside. The terrifying part is that Elizabeth never made it through that door, even though she was so close. Even more chilling is that her friend had no idea this phone call would be the last time she ever spoke to Elizabeth. As soon as Elizabeth hung up, she unbuckled her seat belt, opened the car door, and stepped out. What happened next would remain a mystery and soon turn into a heartbreaking tragedy. By the morning of April 16, a few hours later, Elizabeth's mother, Juanita, woke up and went to check on her daughter. The shock she felt when she found Elizabeth's room empty is hard to imagine. This was completely out of character. No matter how thoroughly Juanita searched the house, Elizabeth was nowhere to be found. In a panic, she looked out the front window and ran to the door, only to see that Elizabeth's car, which was parked outside, was completely empty. Even though the car was running and Elizabeth's cell phone was inside, she was nowhere to be found. This wasn't like her at all. She would never leave her car unattended like that. Panicked, Juanita called the Fort Worth police to report her 28-year-old daughter missing. Deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong. Shortly after the report was filed, officers arrived at Elizabeth's parents' house. The situation was baffling. She had been just steps from her front door. So, how had she disappeared before even reaching home? All the police could do was search for Elizabeth and hope that she was still alive. Elizabeth didn't have any known enemies. There was no reason anyone would want to kidnap or harm her, which made the case especially puzzling for the police. Still, they had to uncover what had happened to bring her safely home. What they didn't realize was that someone nearby had already discovered something that could be crucial. They couldn't have known that this discovery would become a key piece in solving Elizabeth's disappearance. Hours after midnight, around the time she was believed to have vanished, a 911 call was placed. The caller was a fisherman on the Loop 820 bridge overlooking Lake Worth, reporting something unusual late in the night. The fisherman had been out for a late-night fishing trip. Really late, well past midnight, just enjoying the quiet of the lake as if it were any other ordinary Tuesday. That is until something jolted him from his peace. A terrifying, ear-piercing scream was followed by the sound of a heavy crash into the water, shattering the calm night. Because it was so dark, the fisherman couldn't make out who was at the water's edge, or exactly what had happened. But he did notice that the person falling had something around their neck, and they were tumbling straight off a rock from a significant height. Whatever was attached to them wasn't small or light. It was heavy enough to make the crash even more shocking. The only reason the object was visible at all was its size. It was massive, like a rock or a cinder block. Everything else melted into the darkness, leaving the fisherman unsure of what he had just witnessed. He called 911 immediately, knowing every second counted. From what he could see, it appeared that something, possibly a person, given the scream he had heard moments before, had fallen into the water. He hoped that if it was a person, they might still be alive. As he waited for help, he strained to see from the bridge, but the darkness made it nearly impossible to distinguish anything clearly. Soon, firefighters, divers, and emergency personnel arrived at the scene. They managed to pull the individual from the water, but tragically it was already too late. The person was already dead. From the screams he had heard, the fisherman suspected it was a woman. And he was right. The body recovered from the water was dressed in the same maroon medical scrubs Elizabeth wore to work every day. When the police pulled her from the lake, they noticed something tied around her neck. It was a 119-pound concrete block, secured with a rope. The woman's body was nearly as heavy as the stone itself. The block was unusual. It appeared to have once been part of a fence. After the body was sent for examination and identification, it was tragically confirmed to be Elizabeth Ariano, 28 years old. Just hours earlier, she had been out with friends and now she was gone. It was evident that she had drowned. Although her body had been found, neither her family nor the police, who had only recently received the missing persons report, were aware of it yet. Once Elizabeth was reported missing, the police immediately began speaking with those who knew her best. They hoped someone might know where she had gone or if she was with someone so her family could be spared further worry. Initially, the officers considered the possibility that Elizabeth was simply out somewhere enjoying herself, assuming her mother might have been busy and out of sight for a while. All of these theories were quickly dismissed by her family. Elizabeth wasn't the type to abandon everything on a whim. She knew life would be challenging, especially after the divorce, when she would need to juggle work and care for her children on her own. Elizabeth was a planner. If she intended to go somewhere, she would always inform her family and ensure her children's needs were taken care of first. Clearly, Elizabeth wouldn't just disappear without a trace. That's why the police decided to start by questioning her close friends. Everyone who saw her at happy hour confirmed the same thing. Elizabeth had been cheerful herself and carefree. No one had been bothering her, and she hadn't mentioned needing a break from everything. The police were left confused and unsure of what steps to take next. Something about Elizabeth's car also seemed off to the investigators. The keys were still in the door lock, which suggested only two possibilities. She either left them there in a rush or she had been forced out of the vehicle. Her personal belongings, including her wallet and cash, were still inside. It didn't make sense for Elizabeth to leave her car unattended without her keys or wallet. The only plausible explanation would be if she had been locked out and couldn't get back in. Police also canvassed the neighborhood around her parents' house during the night, but no one reported hearing any screams or commotion. Another puzzling detail. While the investigators gathered information about her personal life, they still had very little to go on. That's when the police began to take closer notice. They discovered that Elizabeth's marriage was on the rocks and that she had recently separated from her husband. The officers decided they had to speak with him, not necessarily as a suspect, but to gather information. Perhaps Elizabeth had told him where she was headed, which could help the investigation. The police believed Rudy might know something crucial that could shed light on her disappearance. So, they went to the home he had shared with Elizabeth. What Rudy did after hearing why the police were there and letting them in completely surprised the investigators. Rudy didn't seem particularly concerned about his wife's disappearance. They were separated and she had made it clear she wanted a divorce, so he had already started exploring other relationships. Still, Elizabeth had been his wife and the mother of his children for over a decade, and they had been partners in life, and as the saying goes, partners in crime. Normally, anyone in his position would be frantic and worried if their spouse vanished without a word, leaving their children behind. The police were taken aback by Rudy's surprisingly indifferent reaction. With that in mind, they began asking him the usual questions. When was the last time he saw Elizabeth? Had she spoken to him before she disappeared? Rudy told the police that the last time he saw Elizabeth was 2 days before she disappeared. He also said that the last time he spoke to her on the phone was around 2 a.m. the night before she went missing. According to him, he had been asleep at home when Elizabeth called to let him know she had arrived safely and would soon bring the kids over to see him. The officers then asked Rudy what he had been doing on the day Elizabeth vanished. He offered a seemingly plausible explanation. He and a friend had been working on tinting his car windows, which took several hours. He said he didn't get home until around midnight, exhausted, and went straight to bed, not waking until 7:30 the next morning. You might recall that Elizabeth had planned to meet Rudy with the kids. He waited, but she never showed up. At that point, Rudy assumed she had changed her mind and went about his day, not giving much thought to her absence. It didn't seem unusual to him, especially since they were trying to keep their distance from each other. Yet, Rudy showed no visible concern over his wife's disappearance. Even with police outside his door and Elizabeth missing for hours, he appeared unusually calm and collected. After leaving Rudy's house, the officers still had many unanswered questions. But they knew they needed to broaden their investigation. To track Elizabeth's movements, the police would need input from those who knew her well as her cell phone's location data. That's exactly what they did. When they reviewed her phone records, they received devastating news. A body had been discovered in Lake Worth. Since Elizabeth hadn't been seen for several hours, the authorities were deeply concerned it could be her. When Elizabeth went missing, she had been wearing her maroon scrubs. So, when authorities learned what the woman in the lake was dressed in, everything fell into place. It was then confirmed that the body found in Lake Worth was indeed Elizabeth Ariano. At that point, the case shifted dramatically from a missing person investigation to something far more serious. The police now had two urgent tasks: determine how Elizabeth had died and deliver the tragic news to her family. When her parents and sisters received the call, they were overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. Shock, anger, grief, and confusion all at once. Such news would be devastating for anyone. For the family, receiving such devastating news so suddenly without any warning or build-up was a complete tragedy. At first, some thought Elizabeth might have taken her own life. A possibility that seemed plausible initially. But that theory quickly changed when someone came forward, alerting the police that foul play was involved. When the authorities brought in the rope and concrete block as evidence and showed them to Elizabeth's family, recognition hit immediately. It was Elizabeth's eldest son, just 14 years old at the time, who realized what they were. He remembered the rope from when the family had lived together at Rudy's house, the Ariano family home. As for the concrete block, it didn't matter what it was called. It had come from Rudy's garden. Elizabeth's son confirmed it had actually belonged to an old fence. Setting aside the idea that Elizabeth truly intended to end her life, why would she have gone to Rudy's house specifically to retrieve that rope and that heavy concrete block if she meant to do it herself? If she needed a rope and a rock, she could have found them anywhere. No one genuinely believed Elizabeth would go to such an extreme. Especially since she had shown no signs of struggling with her mental health or having trouble coping. On top of that, the concrete block weighed over 100 pounds. It was almost as heavy as Elizabeth herself, making it highly unlikely she would have been able to end her life in such an unusual and physically demanding way. It was like a bomb went off for the police as all the pieces began to fall into place. Everything was lining up in a way that was almost too perfect. By this point, they were already somewhat suspicious of Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudy, largely because his alibi was weak. He claimed he had been with a friend the night Elizabeth disappeared. But that excuse didn't hold much weight. He could have been lying about both being with him. The investigators knew it was time to scrutinize Rudy's actions. On the night of April 15th, they immediately began examining his old phone records and quickly noticed gaps in his story. Those records revealed that Rudy had called and texted Elizabeth multiple times on the very day she went out with her friends. He seemed unusually interested in Elizabeth's plans after work and when she would be home. But why? They were in the middle of a divorce, so it shouldn't have mattered to him what she was doing. Even more concerning, Rudy's phone records showed he had been near Elizabeth's workplace just before she left for the bar with her friends, which already looked suspicious. And as if that wasn't enough, his phone placed him near Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. on the night she disappeared. This directly contradicted his claim that he had been home since midnight and didn't leave until 7:30 a.m. It became clear that he had been lying, and the police quickly zeroed in on him. Things were finally starting to make sense, and the officers realized that the grieving husband they had seen wasn't as innocent as he appeared. Adding to the suspicion, Rudy showed no real concern about the investigation or its progress. It was as if he had no concern for his missing wife. In fact, the police discovered that he hadn't even checked in to ask about the progress of the investigation. He appeared completely indifferent. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's stepfather, siblings, parents, and children were terrified by the possibilities and kept calling the police, desperate for updates. Eventually, the authorities obtained a warrant to search Rudy's home. Once there, they noticed that the fence in the backyard was broken and one of the concrete posts was missing. The police suspected that this missing post was the very one found tied to Elizabeth's body. The backyard also contained additional concrete blocks that looked very similar. When the police inspected Rudy's truck, they discovered broken pieces of concrete in the bed. It was as clear-cut a crime scene as they could hope for. Everything pointed to Rudy. He had taken a piece of concrete, tied Elizabeth to it, placed her body on the concrete in the truck, and then driven to the lake. To be certain, the officers tested the concrete fragments from Rudy's truck against those found with Elizabeth's body. To their surprise, they matched perfectly. It was confirmed that the rock slowing Elizabeth's body had come from Rudy's property. At last, the police had substantial evidence against him. All that remained was to arrest him and hope the investigation could uncover how Elizabeth had been killed so suddenly and without warning. On April 26, 2016, just 10 days after her body was recovered from Lake Uworth, 36-year-old Rudy Ariano was arrested on suspicion of murdering his wife. He was held at Mansfield City Jail on a $500,000 bond and was soon formally charged with murder. Once Rudy was in custody, the police were able to piece together what likely happened to Elizabeth. Using phone records from the night of April 15, they could track who was where and when, helping to reconstruct the tragic events outside her parents' house. Thanks to the phone records, the police could confirm that Rudy had lied. His lack of concern for his missing wife was suspicious, but that alone wasn't enough to arrest him. Now, however, they had solid evidence. He claimed he had been at home, but the records proved otherwise. During his first conversation with the police after Elizabeth went missing, Rudy said he had been helping a friend tint his car windows and then returned home, staying there until 7:30 a.m. the next morning. The phone records, however, told a very different story. They showed that Rudy had actually been near Elizabeth's workplace just as she was leaving for the day. Rudy spent a significant amount of time near the area where Elizabeth worked, which everyone, including the police, found highly suspicious. Why would he be there? How did he know exactly when she would be leaving? While it's true he knew her routine from living together for over a decade, what happened after he visited her workplace was deeply unsettling and made everyone uneasy. It didn't end there. Rudy's phone records also placed him near Elizabeth's parents' house just before she arrived home after her night out with friends. Essentially, he was at her parents' home in the middle of the night. Yet, no one had reported seeing him there, which added another layer of suspicion to his movements. He had been lingering near her parents' house for a long time, though no one knows exactly how long. There was no legitimate reason for him to be there at that hour. It certainly wasn't boredom. And if you thought Rudy's suspicious behavior ended there, the phone records revealed even more. His and Elizabeth's call logs showed that he repeatedly called and texted her at work, constantly asking when she would be free so he could see her. The police suspected that Rudy was waiting for the right moment to strike. Everyone who knew Elizabeth said she never answered his calls or messages. which likely led him to simply show up and watch. In the days before her disappearance, Elizabeth had even told Rudy that she planned to stay at a hotel for a while, further highlighting his invasive and controlling behavior. Rudy clearly didn't want his ex-wife and children staying in a hotel, so he tried to get Elizabeth to stay at his house. Temporarily. She refused, determined to move forward with her divorce and start a new chapter. It was obvious that his offer was a manipulative attempt to bring her back, but she wasn't going to give in. Regardless, it became increasingly clear that Rudy was lying. He repeatedly claimed that he had been home alone and asleep when Elizabeth supposedly called him at 2 a.m. to discuss when she could bring the kids over. However, phone records proved this was false. No such call took place, and Rudy wasn't even at home at that time. But the police were about to uncover something even more chilling than the phone records. Newly installed CCTV cameras near Elizabeth's house captured footage that would prove crucial in unraveling this confusing case. Around 2:41 a.m. on April 16, Elizabeth's car was seen pulling up to her family's home, only to drive away almost immediately for no apparent reason. Then, around 3 a.m., the same white Dodge Ram pickup truck owned by Rudy was captured on camera heading north from Elizabeth's parents' house. Although the video was too blurry to make out the license plate, the truck style and color matched Rudy's, providing another piece of evidence linking him to the area near Elizabeth's home. It was clearly on its way toward the loop, adding to the mounting proof against him. The 820 bridge, where Elizabeth's body was eventually discovered, became a focal point for the investigation. The police reviewed hours of video from the surrounding area to confirm the sequence of events. Minutes later, the same white pickup truck was seen on North Main Street, just south of the bridge where Elizabeth had either fallen or been pushed into the water. Adding to the suspicion, Rudy appeared completely unconcerned the day after Elizabeth's death. A neighbor reported seeing him drinking beer and playing music on his front porch. He didn't act like someone who had just lost his wife of 13 years and the mother of his children. If anything, he seemed almost happy, even joyful. Meanwhile, the police struggled to get Rudy to talk about what happened to Elizabeth, and he continued to deny everything despite the mounting evidence placing him at the crime scene. The police, however, had a different plan. With the overwhelming evidence against him, it was clear that Rudy was guilty and a conviction could very likely result in a death sentence. Faced with this reality, Rudy finally cracked and agreed to a plea deal. He would be charged with murder. But by admitting guilt, he could avoid the death penalty. While Rudy clearly valued his own life, he had shown no concern for his wife's. That's why he quickly accepted the deal. After years of back and forth, he formally admitted to the charges on January 30, 2019. Even then, the police had to piece together what had happened as Rudy did not provide full details about what he had done to Elizabeth. Rudy is believed to have spent the entire day tracking Elizabeth despite repeatedly texting and calling her. Elizabeth wasn't engaging with him, leaving the question of why he was so obsessed with contacting her, especially after their separation, all the more chilling. It's believed he followed her home in his white pickup truck after she left her friends that night, likely seizing the opportunity when she messaged her friends that she had arrived safely at her front door. Rudy seized a moment when Elizabeth was distracted, pulled her from her car, and placed her in his truck before driving away. She must have been terrified, possibly struggling against him. After that, Rudy reportedly secured the heavy concrete block and rope around her neck. He then drove to the Lakeworth Bridge and pushed Elizabeth along with the concrete block into the water. The weight of the rock prevented her from reaching the surface, and she likely struggled desperately before tragically drowning. The police believe the block was intentionally tied to her body to ensure it sank and wouldn't be easily found. A chilling and calculated act. It's horrifying to realize that Elizabeth was likely still alive when she was violently thrown into the 40 feet deep water, as the fishermen had heard her screaming just moments before. One can only imagine what Elizabeth's final thoughts were. Seeing the father of her children and her husband of 13 years treat her so cruelly, tossing her like a stone into the lake. Rudy showed no remorse or concern. Something was deeply wrong with him, and he was determined to exact revenge on the woman he had professed to love for over a decade. As the police initially suspected, this was no accident. Rudy deliberately manipulated Elizabeth, taking her life and ensuring she had no chance of escape. Why he did it is known only to him, and he has refused to explain. A few days after admitting guilt, Rudy was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yet, one question still haunts everyone. Why? What drove Rudy to commit such a brutal act against his wife? Elizabeth's family delivered deeply moving and heartbreaking victim impact statements. Her sisters, Ella and Joe, who were very close to her, sobbed on the stand. Despite their grief, they summoned the courage to look Rudy in the eye and convey the depth of their pain. They told him that he had destroyed his own children's lives by taking away their mother, her love, and their sense of security. Hearing that her children cry every night because they missed their mom brought her sisters to tears. These were just kids longing for their mother. Unaware of the tragic circumstances that led to her death, they are left to face this unimaginable loss, knowing they will never see their mother again. Another person to speak was Fiddley, Elizabeth's stepfather. His words focused mainly on Elizabeth's children. At the end of his statement, he looked Rudy in the eye and said what everyone was feeling. "I hope you rot in hell." But Rudy, showing the cruel indifference that defined him, didn't even flinch. He stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes empty and unfeeling. This lack of remorse fueled everyone's anger even more. What hurt Elizabeth's family the most was that Rudy had been right there with them when she went missing. He posted pictures of Elizabeth and pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. All the while, he was the one responsible for putting them through this unimaginable ordeal. Rudy was merely going through the motions, trying to avoid getting caught. But the police were already closing in on him. He had deceived his family in the cruelest way, showing two completely different sides of himself. At Elizabeth's death, the only time he ever displayed any emotion was the facade of a grieving widower. At the funeral, he stood beside Joe and Ashley, pretending to cry, playing the part perfectly. Elizabeth was a mother, sister, daughter, and aunt. A remarkable person whom anyone would have been lucky to know. She was a devoted mom, doing everything she could to give her children a good life. Yet, in the end, the very person who had once been her partner and closest friend took her life. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.